Jeffrey Sachs, you need no introduction. How did you get involved in this situation?
This scourge of human trafficking and modern slavery affects all the world economy. It's fundamentally against everything we stand for in sustainable development, which is for a just, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable society. So when Pope Francis took this up, of course, all the world has responded, and indeed the United Nations organizations with which I work, such as the International Labor Organization, are heavily involved. And now that the religious leaders have come together, this is a huge call to action, and I think it will find its place in the Sustainable Development Goals that will be adopted by the world in 2015.
In some ways, you could argue that slavery is a corruption issue, that the reason why slavery still exists is because corrupt law enforcement and corrupt governments are able to get away with not enforcing their own laws. Is that not the root cause of this whole issue?
Of course, lawlessness is rife in many different parts of the world economy and world society, and this is one manifestation. But I think what happened here today of saying that there's an economy, but beyond the economy are shared global values, and the economy must live within the space of moral values, is a fundamental point. And it's a fundamental point both for ending trafficking and modern slavery, but also a fundamental point for addressing other scourges like climate change and vast inequalities between wealth and extreme poverty. So I think this moral call that we need an economy worldwide that functions according to basic human values is a central principle. It's core to addressing the issues of trafficking and slavery, but more generally it's core to the whole hope for sustainable development.
In some ways you could argue that money will always find its own level and that corruption and exploitation will always be with us. How do you think that the moral code can be effectively implemented? How can that actually be translated into real action on the ground?
I don't think it's ever right to say that crime or poverty will always be with us. I think these are a matter of human choice and human will. It's probably right that we can never put the guard down and say we've solved a problem like slavery or human trafficking or mass pollution or extreme poverty once and for all. That we won't have where a day comes and you say, that's over, that's not a problem anymore. Because the problem of human values are constantly in need of addressing and regenerating, strengthening, and recommitment every generation. So in this sense, what one is not saying is that there's a magic cure that's going to end the scourge once and for all, but what the religious leaders said and what the business leaders are saying and what the labor experts and economic experts are saying is we can address this crisis, we can bring this decisively under control and then keep it under control, but it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of focus.
Obviously you can't reduce a subject as complex as this to one point, but if there were one issue that you address first that would be the focus of what you would do, what would that be?
Well, I think there generally isn't one answer. People end up in this kind of situation out of various kinds of desperation. Parents who are so desperate that they can't look after their kids, or people who have no economic alternative or who are in a kind of debt bondage. There are many, many routes into this. They start with, of course, from a moral point of view, the lack of the dignity and the ability to meet basic needs. But what we need to do is not only clamp down on the corruption and the lawlessness, but we also have to address the needs of extremely poor people in the world and help them to lift themselves out of extreme poverty. So there are many fronts on which this battle will be fought.
Are you optimistic?
I'm always optimistic because I know that in the 21st century, slavery is a horrible anachronism. It has no place here. Same is true with extreme poverty. This is a scourge that has been with humanity seemingly forever, but it doesn't mean it's a permanent one. It's one that we can solve. And our environmental crises. We have to be optimistic. That's a kind of moral imperative. It basically is a stance that we can address these problems, and it surely is true that we can address and solve these problems.
Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much.
A pleasure.